All right, welcome everyone to this meeting of SABR's East Coast Cooperative, a group of 6 chapters in Eastern Canada and the United States who are cooperating to bring you more great presentations. I'm Bruce McClure, the chair of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter in Maine and New Hampshire, and tonight we have a fascinating speaker for you. H.R. Ryan was researching her novel about a pitcher in the 1970s when she met a real pitcher from that era on social media, Mark Littell, formerly of the Kansas City Royals and St. Louis Cardinals. He kindly agreed to help her out with background information she needed. Her friendship with him grew to include her copy editing in his 4th book of self-penned memoirs. When Littell died unexpectedly during a heart operation in September 22, HR stepped up to edit his unfinished manuscript for publication. To complete it, she interviewed over 40 of Littell's friends and former teammates, including Whitey Herzog, Jim Kaat, Galen Cisco, Dennis Leonard, and longtime Auburn baseball coach Hal Baird. Bootheel Boy will be published later this year with a foreword by Peter Golenbock. H.R. Ryan is the vice chair of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter and author of the SABR Bio project's offering on Jerry Remy, and she is here tonight to give her talk entitled My Literary Adventures with Mark Littell. H.R., welcome, my friend. How are you?
All right. Thanks for having me.
It's all you. Go get them.
Okay. I wanted to introduce Ethan Sargent. He is, or he can introduce himself. He is a long time family friend of the Littells for going back to the Cardinals era, I guess, right, Ethan?
Yeah, it's been a long road with Mark, and Mark was with me for his days leading up to his operation, staying here in St. Louis. He would talk to dozens of people every day, and whenever Heather would call, everything stopped, and Mark got excited about his book. So this was Mark's passion in his later years, and he was a coach and a mentor to a lot of people, and he knew people all over the country. And this book is really going to be exciting for a lot of people just because there's so many stories and pictures and memoirs that people have not heard before. So it's been a long road. It's Mark's 2-year anniversary of his passing was just a couple days ago. So we're really kind of excited to be where we are right now.
Oh, great. I wanted to ask you, what year was it you were the ball boy for the...
Oh boy. Well, I met Mark.
I have it in the book. I just couldn't remember it offhand because I have a picture I wanted to show and I can't remember the year. 1990?
Well, that was 91, probably 91.
91. And
yeah.
what team was it again? The Waterloo?
Well, we had the Waterloo Diamonds. That was the A ball.
Yeah, that's the picture that I have. Is the one
that might have been 89 actually, but then that was up in Waterloo. It was I think it was a Padres affiliate, but I don't think anybody from that team made it to the big leagues. But I went a couple years later. I went out to California League where Mark was coaching for San Diego, and spent several weeks with the team as a bat boy, and got to travel. That was Bruce Bochy's team for San Diego, the A-ball at Rancho Cucamonga, and that was fun. Bochy was very popular with the players, and there were several guys on that team, that Matt Meeske, Jay Gaynor, Scott Frederickson. There was some really good ball players on that team. And then next year, I don't know, Mark had a lot of adventures in the minor leagues, and they're kind of outlined in several of Mark's books, but there's going to be some more coming with the Bootheel Boy publication in a couple of days.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get that off the ground.
We'll get it there.
Yeah, we'll get it there. It's been a long haul, but we're getting close.
Sure.
So let me give these little remarks, and then I'll show some of the pictures that I brought on the PowerPoint thing. So
excellent.
So my major interest is baseball literature, and I've always been interested in the personalities of the game and the characters and the stories about them and the stories that they told. I've been reading baseball autobiographies since the early 70s, probably. And they were usually ghostwritten. Some were better than others, but they were all entertaining to me anyway. Ball Four, of course, and The Bronx Zoo. And Jim Brosnan's books I especially enjoyed because he wrote them himself without a ghostwriter, which I thought was really cool at the time. And I've been working on a baseball novel off and on for quite a while. And then COVID happened. And that kind of reminded me that life is short. And if I wanted to get this done, I'd better get moving. So in 2021, I started working on it in earnest. And I got about 50,000 words done on a rough draft, and I felt pretty good about myself. So in January 2022, I was reading one of the many baseball groups that I belong to on Facebook, and I found a post about Thurman Munson. That was a great little vignette, and it was written by pitcher Mark Littell. I remembered seeing him pitch a couple times for the Cardinals. When I was a Mets fan, as a very young teenager, I went to a lot of Mets games in the late 70s and early 80s, and the Cardinals were one of the teams that I enjoyed watching at the time. The Cardinals and the Pirates, I thought, were the coolest teams to see play the Mets, who the Mets were not really very good at the time. So they had very intriguing personalities at that time, the Cardinals and the Pirates. So I thought, wow, this guy, after I read this little vignette, I thought, hey, this guy is really good. He should write a book. Then I thought, well, maybe he's already written one. So I looked him up on Amazon, and I discovered that he has published 3 books. So I thought, wow, all right. So I got them and I read them. And I have them right here. I'll give you a little overview. On the 8th Day, God Made Baseball is Mark's first book, and it's his memoir of his major league career with the Royals and the Cardinals, including the episode that Mark is most known for, the home run that he gave up to Chris Chambliss in the 1976 ALCS. And it includes a short piece by Chambliss, which tells his side of the story. And second one that he published, but he told me later that he had written it first. And maybe you know more about this, Ethan, than I do, but he said that he had written it first and showed it to people, and they liked it, and his friends liked it. But then they all said, "What about the baseball? We have to find out about the baseball. You have to tell us all the baseball stories." So he put Country Boy aside and wrote on the 8th Day. Is that what you heard from Mark?
Yeah, because I think Mark grew up in the Bootheel of Missouri, which is a rural area. It's very agriculture driven, and so Mark had a lot of adventures. I like reading that one over the most, just because they had so many good stories about Mark and his brother, and getting in adventures and blowing up pickup trucks and dynamite. And oh my gosh, I just if you were Mark's neighbor, I'm sure you'd have a lot of stories that didn't make the book. But yeah, I think that's correct as far as the timeline. And Mark's still very popular in the Bootheel, and I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of people excited about the book upcoming, called Bootheel Boy.
Now, what's the deal with the Bootheel? It's between. I'm from New York, so the whole thing is very vague to me. But it's between like Arkansas and.
Yeah, there was some kind of land disagreement many years ago, as we often have, and so it was Missouri carved out a little chunk of Arkansas, and it's flat ground. It's bottomland. It's a lot of swamps that were drained in the 1800s and early 1900s for agriculture. So there's canals and there's causeways, and it's a very very flat and expansive. So a lot of like Johnny Cash was born just on the other side of the Bootheel in Arkansas. So there's yeah. So Memphis is the closest major city to allow those Bootheel boys, and northeast Arkansas. So they would often Memphis is where Mark had some stories also from his youth. But St. Louis was kind of the Big Apple as far as the towns in the region. So everybody went to St. Louis to go see a Cardinal game.
I was kind of surprised. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of Cardinal fans also, because the KMOX 50,000 watt and the Cardinal network had any small town. I went to Cape Girardeau for college, and all those little small towns in Missouri and Illinois, Iowa, they had a Cardinal affiliate that was tied back to KMOX, and Jack Buck and Harry Carey and Mike Shannon, those announcers that were very, very well received and very popular all across the Midwest and deep South. I mean, Mississippi, there's a big fan contingent, and it's all built on the back of that Cardinal network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was surprised that Missouri has such a southern influence in that area. I always thought of Missouri coming from New York City. I always thought of it as being a sort of Midwestern, upper Midwest kind of thing. But I guess
the crossroads. We have a little bit of the Midwest, and St. Louis kind of has almost a New Orleans feel, just because of the French and Catholic influence. But if you go further south, we have the Ozarks, and it can get, we're kind of a border state, I guess, during the Civil War. So we had a lot of conflicts here that go back generations.
Yeah, I heard that. I also heard that there's a split between how you pronounce it, Missouri or Missouri, depending on the location and the allegiance and all this kind of stuff.
I think it's the kind of which side of the Missouri River you were born on. So that's what it comes down to a lot of times.
Well, anyway, Mark was from the really like southern part, which kind of threw me at first because I didn't really know any southern people. So it was kind of a culture shock working with him. But this is his third book, which is What's Up Ramrod, which is about his experiences in Australia. After his major league career, he became a pitching coach and he went to Australia to coach for a few years. And it also includes a whole lot of his adventures in the minor leagues being a pitching coach. And also there are some stories of his experiences in the minors. It's a very wide-ranging book, and it's a big, thick book. And this is a fun book to read. It also tells the story of how Mark invented the Nutty Buddy athletic protector and started a business manufacturing them. So this is a big, important book for, Littell history.
But Mark had a lot of stories in that book that I've never heard before. So that's another one. The trainer for the Omaha Royals was a special touchstone for a lot of those young Royals that all came up together, and that was my favorite story from Ramrod. And that they went back to Omaha for his funeral, and somebody snuck a shotgun into the cemetery and blasted it off when they put him in the grave. So those Royals guys were all a bunch of wild players, and I think they had a good time in Omaha. So they had that esprit de corps because they had so many years together.
Yeah, well, they are really fun books, and I had a great time discovering them. And he was a very clear conversational writer, and he wrote simply, but he spent a lot of time picking out the right words to use, and he really took it seriously, took the whole writing gig seriously. And he also had a unique style of humor, of self-deprecating humor that I gravitated to, where he would tell a story that was on him, making himself look kind of like a goofball or making a mistake or whatever. And he obviously had a big major leaguer type ego, but he when he was telling these stories, he kind of danced around that and didn't really come off as a real, self-centered, narcissistic person. Anyway, they're just really funny books. So after reading these books, I wrote to him on Facebook to tell him that I enjoyed them, and we struck up a friendship. And we talked a lot about ADHD, which we both struggled with, and he talks about it in one of his books. And we talked about the process of writing. I told him about my novel in progress. And as it happens, my novel is set in the 70s and is about a pitcher. So I asked him, would you be willing to be my background expert and answer some baseball questions for me while I'm researching this? Because you were there at the time that I'm writing about, and it's your, specialty. And he said, yeah, sure. If you think I can help, whatever you want, ask. So we started talking on the phone, and I sent him a big chunk of my draft, and he took a look at it, and we talked about it a little bit. So he started sending me pieces that he hadn't published yet. And this is how he rewrote things. He would send his stories around to his friends and ask for feedback. He loved feedback. He was like a stand-up comic, basically, testing things out with different people, different audiences. And he would take their comments into consideration. And if he agreed with them, he'd refine his stuff and rework it and polish it and get it just right. And he'd go back to things and pull them out and work on them some more. He didn't just toss stuff off. So the first batch of pieces he sent me, he'd been working on for a while, and they were pretty smooth and didn't have any, anything that I would consider to be typos or anything. But then he started sending me stuff that he had just written, which was more in the rough draft category with some typos and punctuation issues. And I happen to have a background in proofreading and editing. So I, being persnickety, said to him, I could proofread this for you and do a little copy editing if that would help you. So he took me up on that. And there wasn't a lot that had to be fixed. It was mainly punctuation and adjusting sentences and paragraph breaks and stuff like that. And I, didn't get into the content of what he was writing at all. I was just editing the stuff that he would send, copy editing rather. So the stories that he was writing covered a lot of ground. He wanted to tell about his experiences playing winter ball in Puerto Rico between the 1973 and 74 seasons when he was with the Royals. He also had a bunch of stories about his youth and spending time in Gideon prior to going to Puerto Rico, after his rookie year and before the 74 season. Plus, he had several what I would call miscellaneous pieces, because that's kind of the way he thought and created things. It was like more of a hodgepodge of things from different sources and different ideas, and then he would pull them all together. That's also an ADHD characteristic, but he was very creative that way. So we had all these sort of like little miscellaneous pieces hanging around. We talked about how best to pull it all together into a book and have some sort of a unified structure. And I suggested that he needed some sort of a bridge to the Puerto Rico thing. So I suggested that maybe he could write something about what it was like to go back to his small town after having been up pitching in the majors for, his rookie year. So the next day he sent me several paragraphs of a draft he'd written overnight. And he said, "You mean like this?" And I read it and I said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I mean." And he said, "All right." So he went on to finish writing the piece. And I guess he was pleased with the idea and pleased with what I suggested, because after that, he started sending me more stuff and calling me to talk about it and work on it. So that's how I started working with him and being what I would call an editor. Is kind of pompous, but I was sort of like an editing coach, assistant, writing, just sort of coaching him when he was stuck in a knotty situation and suggesting various things, and then he would try things out and sort it out on his own. But I was kind of like in the background somewhere. So he liked to rewrite, which is really the key to getting anything decent when you're writing. And he liked getting into the nitty-gritty of writing. He liked trying out different words and finding the perfect way to describe something. And he really enjoyed the whole process. He would say, "I just love this. This is so much fun. I'm having so much fun." So we got a big kick out of working together. He liked the word count feature. And when he had finished a draft, he would put the word count down at the bottom. And the word counts were kind of like his little treasures. And one day I tallied up all the word counts in the pieces that he had sent, and I came up with more than 30,000 words. So I said, "Hey, you're close to having a real book here." And he was very pleased with that. So we talked about how he wanted to proceed with the book, what the structure would look like. He told me he wanted to finish the stories about Puerto Rico and then explain what happened after he got back home, when he found out that he was dealing with an arm injury that had been aggravated while he was pitching in Puerto Rico. That would conclude that part of the book. Then he would work in the other stories that he had floating around. He had some serious health problems that came up that year, but he didn't talk about them much. Sometimes I wouldn't hear from him for a week or so, and I get a little worried, and I'd send him a message and say, "How are you feeling? Are you doing okay?" And he'd send me this little brief response, this wry sort of thing, like, "Kinda." And then he'd get back in the swing of things and start working on his writing again, because he really enjoyed that. He liked it, even though he wasn't feeling great. It made him, I think it gave him a sense of focusing on something other than his own ailments. So he managed to finish a piece on an old friend, Gary Blaylock, who was the scout who had signed him originally. And Mark managed to get that published in a Missouri paper. I don't know. Do you remember which paper it was? He showed me
I think it was the Rural Missourian, which is
Okay.
a paper that goes out to the co-ops that are electric co-ops. So it's kind of a statewide publication, but it's very regional depending on what electrical system you're on.
So he was really thrilled by that, because that was like his first byline, in a magazine and a newspaper. And then he even started writing a play. He said to me once, one day, he said, "What, do you know anything about writing a play?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know something about it. I mean, I have an English degree. I read a lot of plays." So we started working on this play together, which was set in a bullpen in the minor leagues. And it was really funny. It was a really funny premise. And we got maybe like 18 pages into that. before he went back to working on his book. But he just thought that was really funny, and he would sit there and just rattle off these like really funny lines of dialogue, and I'd be like typing it in, So, but that was really great, and he had various characters in it. He had Gino Tanachi, the character who I think was based on Gene Tennis, and some other characters that he knew. So it was really funny. But then he started to get a little bit serious. He started drafting a piece in which he talked a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt. So he and his wife Sana lived in North Dakota, nearby the national park, which is named for Teddy Roosevelt. And he told me about how he visited one day with Sana and had an interesting kind of interaction with the wild horses, the band of wild horses there. The stallion came up to him and they had this little rapport. And I said, well, that's a really cool story. Why don't you write that up, write that story down? So he started to write it. And as it came out with like kind of intertwined with something he wanted to get off his chest about the Chambliss home run episode. And the tone was very different from his other stories. And when he explained what he wanted to do with it, I said, are you sure you want to go there to revisit the Chambliss thing? Because, you've already told about it in the first book in very great detail and been very open about, your reactions and everything. So do you really want to do this again? And he said, yes, absolutely. I think I have something important to say about it. And I said, all right, it's your book. This is the thing I would always say to him when we would get into these little, every once in a while, I'd say, do you really want to use this word? And he's like, yes, I really want to use this word. I said, all right, it's your book. You use the word you want. So I just said, it's your book. You do what you want. I'm just here to help you. So in August 2022, he planned to go to the Cardinals 1982 World Championship team reunion, and he was excited about that. I suggested that he write a piece about that for the book, and we talked about that for a while. That would have been an interesting thing to read. He said he planned to go to his cardiologist for a checkup the week after the reunion. He had told me that he had several heart operations in recent years, so I knew that was an ongoing issue that he had. The reunion in St. Louis was a great success, and he had a good time seeing all the guys again, including Whitey Herzog, who was there, and Jim Kaat. But then the following week, I guess it was like Monday, he had the tests. It was very soon after the weekend. He went into the cardiologist and had these tests and exams, and they didn't go well. And he was suddenly scheduled for this major operation, which was 2 weeks from the date that he went into the hospital for these tests. And for that 2 weeks, he stayed with you.
Mm-hmm.
You lived near the hospital or close by the hospital?
I was Mark's sidekick there again. I've had a lot of adventures with Mark over the years, and I think that Mark knew that it was going to be a risky surgery. He was hoping for a reset. That Mark was a big, strong guy, and he wasn't used to being down. And I don't know if out of 100 people, if 99 of them would have gotten the chance at this surgery, but cardiologist, and he was ready to give Mark a shot. So that's what took place, and it was I think it was a 13-hour surgery. It was supposed to be a quadruple bypass, and everything that I think could have gone wrong went wrong. So it was Mark had calcium or bone spurs and the calcium deposits, and when the doctor got in there, I'm sure he had his hands full because it was a long day.
Yeah, it sounded like it was really awful. And when he was with you, we talked about the book, and he didn't have much energy to write, but he did have energy to talk. He always had energy to talk. And so we talked about the roadmap, that he wanted to follow when he got out of the hospital, and what he wanted to do with the book. And we talked about edits. We talked about a couple of the pieces he'd been working on, and we tied together some of the things that were loose ends with things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a very, I just kind of assumed everything would be all right. And I assumed he was going to bounce back in a week or something, and he'd be back on track, and we'd finish the book. So, but unfortunately, he did not survive the surgery, and he passed away on September 5th, 2022, and he was 69. So that was a terrible shock to everybody. And I didn't really know what to do. I was left with this unfinished manuscript, which was about 41,000 words by that point. So I was like, what are we going to do with this? What's going to happen to it? I mean, you put so much work into it, and there was so much good stuff in it. I think he did some of his best writing in it, that I felt it had to be published somehow. So how could we do this? It was a little short to be a book on its own. So I figured that if I talked to some of his friends and former teammates who were mentioned in his book and interviewed them and got like their stories from, their experiences with Mark and their friendships with Mark, that would augment the length of the book and make it long enough to publish as a book, as a good sized book. So I talked to Sana, and she gave her approval, and then I started the process. So I got in touch with a few of the Cardinals through the Cardinals front office, Whitey Herzog, Jim Kaat, Dane Orge, and Whitey put me in touch with Galen Cisco, who had been Mark's pitching coach with the Royals. And I found Jim Wolford, his old friend from the Royals, on Facebook. I found some people on Facebook. A lot of people I talked to said, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy," and gave me his number, or look him up over here. And so it was this sort of like patchwork that took place over, I'd say, like a year and a half of just piecing together all these people. And the Royals connected me with Dennis Leonard, who had also been in Puerto Rico for that 1973-74 season. In fact, he and Mark shared a house together, and Hal Baird was on that team too. And I found him through contacting Auburn. I just called the university and I said, "Do you have a contact number for Hal Baird?" And they just gave it to me. So I'm like, all right, well, that was easy. So I needed to do some research into the Puerto Rico Winter League to make sure that Mark and the other folks who came up with stories had their details right. And through SABR, I got in touch with Tom Van Heining, who wrote this great book, Puerto Rico's Winter League, which is like, I guess, the definitive work on the subject. And there isn't a lot about Mark in there. You just mentioned briefly, but the whole system down there is so much different than I was familiar with from the major league level. So it was very interesting to read. I highly recommend this book. So I collected all these stories from people. Sana gave me a list of friends and colleagues from later in his life, after his baseball career was over, and people from his Nutty Buddy era, when he started the business, and people who we worked with in other capacities. So eventually I had more than 40 people who had known Mark and wanted to be part of the book. Most of them preferred to talk to me in interviews, but about a quarter of them wrote their own pieces, which was great, like you. And Ethan wrote a great piece. And so I really just had a wonderful time accumulating these stories, and some of them are just absolutely hilarious stories about Mark.
Yeah,
So I started. Go ahead.
I was going to say Heather was able to draw out a lot more from me than I anticipated. So at first I kind of just wrote a bang, bang, boom, boom. And then the next thing, Heather said, "Well, it'd be really nice if you could just expand on this a little bit." So the process, I was very pleased, but going into it, I was not expecting where it would take me. So that's what makes it fun. It was another Littell adventure.
Yes, he was kind of a specialist in this stuff. So I got in touch with a few of Mark's friends and former teammates through Facebook, and it was also helpful, Facebook, in another way, because I had been thinking, gee, it's kind of too bad we can't use the Topps cards in the book, because they're so evocative of that era of, the graphics are just so 70s, 80s. I could just picture them in my mind. And you collect them too. I think you collect
Of course.
baseball cards. So I thought, that's too bad. I'm sure they'd charge a lot of money for rights, because, there was a big company and everything. So then I was reading a baseball books group, and I saw an author of a new book say something about how, I got permission from Topps to use their cards for free. And I was like, how did you do that? So tell me all about this. So he told me who to contact at Topps, and I jumped all over that. And the process took a really long time. It took like a year. And I had to fill out the forms many, many times again and over again. And it went through all these different desks and people. And anyway, it took forever, but it finally got approved. So we can use the Topps cards for free, which was really great. So we have several of them in the book. And then Ethan sent me a picture of Mark shaking Lou Brock's hand on the occasion of Brock's 3,000th hit, which was on August 13, 1979. The Cardinals beat the Cubs 3-2, and Mark got the win in relief. Now, you had that on some sort of a plaque, I think, or?
I was at a baseball card show when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and there was a vendor there that was selling the tintypes, the presses, the printing plates from the St. Louis Globe Democrat. So I saw Mark's picture on there, and I snatched it up, and it sat in my grandparents' living room for a long time. And then I had it framed for my dad for a Christmas present maybe 10 years ago. So it was one of those things that you don't see too often anymore, but it must have been an ex-Globe Democrat employee that had scrounged these up over the years, and it kind of presented the ones with the nice pictures, and he had a really nice display. It was actually a baseball card show at Busch Stadium where they had it in the walkways outside the stadium. And yeah, it had bounced around a little bit, but it's on my dad's office wall now. But that's where it started, and it led you down an interesting road with the Globe Democrat.
Yeah, I was just about to get to that. So it was taken by photographer Jack Folland, and it was originally published in the Globe Democrat. So I tracked down the permission for that, and I found it led me to the St. Louis Mercantile Library, which happens to house the Globe Democrat's photo archive now. And as it turned out, they didn't have the original photo for some reason of that, but they did have many other photos, which included Mark. But there were too many for the research librarian to take photos of and send to me, so I could weed them out. So I asked Ethan, could you do some legwork for me, like actual legwork, and go to the library and look through their files like in person, because I can't, do that from New Hampshire. And so thanks to Ethan's legwork, we got several really great photos of Mark, which I'll show you a couple later. But thank you, Ethan, for that.
Yeah,
That was really great.
it was a fun experience.
It was really very interesting. And the research librarian was a great guy, from what I understand. He was very nice to me on the phone and very, very cordial and funny. So as for Peter Golenbock, who everybody knows from all of his many best-selling sports books, I got in touch with him through a mutual friend, Ralph Tycho. Ralph had been a friend of Mark's for many years. And so he put me in touch with Peter. And I asked Peter if he would read the manuscript and consider giving me a blurb quote to put on the back cover. And to my surprise, he said yes. And then he read the book and responded with such enthusiasm. He was so positive about the book and Mark's writing that I said, since you like it so much, could you write a foreword? And he very kindly did write a foreword. So that's how we got him on board with the whole thing. So where we're at right now is we hope the book will be published later this month. And then my job will be over and the book will be out into the world and everybody will be very happy. So I'll show you the pictures I've set up to show you. And after that, I will answer whatever questions you have. So let me see if I can get this photo thing working out here. There we go. Oh yeah, I wanted to read this for you. Hang on. I'm gonna knock this thing off here. Okay. So, God forbid I should use this technology. Okay, so share. And then I want to go to this one, right?
You did
it. Okay. It works.
There it is. Good job.
It works terrific. All right, so let me read this to you. This is what got me started on the whole Mark Littell thing. From the group Traditional Baseball Fans, Thurman Munson, Yankee captain. Remember Thurman saying something to me underneath the runway in Yankee Stadium, where a few of us had matriculated to talk some shit. I was 23 at the time. I just wanted to listen in and try to size up some of these guys in pinstripes. I never spoke to opposing hitters. I liked Gibson's rule of thumb. Don't let them know you. In other words, F them. Thurman said, "Country, we got to play this game tonight?" Questionable rainout. "Don't know, Thurman. I hadn't asked the weatherman yet." He gave me that nice grin with tobacco juice oozing through his teeth, then nodded his head. Yeah, he was just trying to figure me out. Nice guy, but I knew, like all good ball players, he was down and dirty between the lines. He too could play dumb as a fox very well. Everyone knew he was just a hell of a guy. Yep, without a doubt, an A1 catcher and salesman. Sad day for New York and the baseball world when Thurman Munson died. So I thought that was a pretty cool little vignette in itself. So here's some pictures that I got. This picture I found on eBay, and it was by this guy, Mroviec, I think, from Chicago, and he had passed away, but his son has fortunately exactly the same name. So I found him on the internet, and I expressed to him that we wanted to use his picture in this book and his father's picture. And he said, great, fine, whatever, and gave me all the permission. And, so that was really nice. I also found several beautiful color photos by a guy named Clifton Bootheel, who is in his mid 80s now. And he also very kindly said, sure, you can use these for free if you want. And he gave me the cover photo, which I'll show you in just a second, and of Mark. And so he provided some really necessary pictures for us to include in the book. And this is an example of the tops card type of tops cards that I'm going to be using in the book, or that I am using in the book. And here is the picture of Lou Brock after his 3,000th hit. And there's Mark there. That's the picture that Ethan has in his possession, and the plate of it. So here's this great picture that we got from the library of Mark and Whitey. Here's a couple more pictures of Mark in action. And here's a picture I really like, which is very different. It's Mark pitching to Gary Templeton's son at a family day, on St. Louis Cardinals family day, which I thought was really a nice addition to the book. And here is the front cover of the new book. And as you can see, that's a picture from 78, I think, 79, of the Cardinals away uniform taken by Clifton Bootheel, who is going to be credited in the book. So that's the story.
And Bootheel also is selling some of those pictures on eBay. So
yeah,
he has some interesting shots of some stars and things. So if you have someone you're interested in looking up, you can look up Mark Littell poster, and you'll see that you can go through that site to get to something, because that's how we were able, I think, to find that picture for the cover, was through Bootheel.
Yeah, it's complicated. The guy who sells the pictures on eBay bought all the pictures from Bootheel. But in order to use the picture, I have to get Bouthel's permission, because of it's just crazy. So I had the permission from the guy selling the picture. He was like, fine, but you have to find, the whole photo permission thing is just completely berserk. So we managed to skirt a lot of the issues involved with all of that by finding the actual photographers, hunting them down, or in the case of the library, going through the library, paying them a small fee to use the pictures in the book. So that was a really big benefit. If any one of you have had to deal with like Getty Images or something, it's just like unbelievable. They charge thousands of dollars for the rights to put a picture in a book. And so
I didn't realize also, Heather, that there were other libraries like the UMSL library that has those archives. So it's kind of a network of those, right?
I don't really know. I guess.
What's the name? What kind of library is it? It's
the Mercantile Library.
Yeah, Mercantile Library.
I think it's affiliated with the university somehow, and I guess as a mercantile library, it has a lot of business oriented stuff in it. And but I know that the Sporting News archive, which everybody used for many years, is now like up in arms, up in like, tied up somewhere because of some weird fraud that happened. So some guy bought all the rights to all the pictures and then like defrauded people. So they're all like frozen somewhere. It's trying to get any baseball pictures is really difficult, just to be, honest about it. Sorry, Bruce, you wanted to say something? And
we think writing is just writing when you're trying to put together a book. I like to say that I envy the writers in SABR or any industry, but it's not just writing. You've given us a window into putting together the physical copy of the book and getting the permission to plug the visuals necessary to bring out the human end of the story, to see the person that you're referring to. It's interesting to hear these stories. You think, okay, I'm going to write this book. Oh, I want to use this visual. Oh, I have to track down 1 million people in order to get it right and whatnot. But if you have a question or a comment for HR and Ethan tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button, and then you will see raise hand. Once you do that, you are in line to talk to one of our presenters this evening, either HR, Ethan, or both. And people are jumping in line for you two already. First one up is Molly. Molly, unmute and go ahead.
Hi, HR and Ethan. Thank you for jointly doing this tonight for us. It was lovely. HR, just a question. I was wondering if he ever had a dedication page in mind before he passed away, like someone he wanted to dedicate the book to, or did he ever talk about that to you, or did you create a dedication page in his memory?
And HR has frozen.
Well, maybe Ethan knows this.
Maybe Ethan
Yeah,
knows this.
I'm not sure if there was a dedication. I know that our idea was to get this book published a little quicker than we did, but Heather worked through a lot of dead ends, and a lot of people that said they wanted to contribute, and then you ask them and they ask them, and then kind of come to a point where you have to cut bait. So I know that Blaylock was an important one to get this book published so he could see it. And I know Whitey Herzog was shared on the book before his passing. And he came to Mark's funeral actually. And when Mark was put to rest here in St. Louis, he actually lived about 2 miles from the funeral home. So I think Mark had a lot of history with a lot of people, but I think that Mr. Blaylock was the one that was really the point of the spear, is trying to get this over the finish line before he passed away.
Heather had some technical difficulties and wound up dropping off the call, so I'm sure she's going to come back here in just a minute. But let's go to Ryan McClanahan. Ryan, you're up. How you doing?
Good, thank you very much. So, just a comment. You guys had mentioned the fraud, and that's actually the John Rogers. He was the fraudster, and he ended up taking a lot of, I guess, a lot of really rare baseball photos, and that's tied up for years. And those collections are they're all over the globe as far as I'm concerned. So my question here is, was there anybody that you had interviewed that you were surprised to have actually reach out to you guys?
Heather did most of the interviewing, but I know that there were some people that Heather thought were going to be responsive, and maybe they kind of like wanted to do it, but they just didn't follow through. I know Heather, being a Mets fan, she was really excited when she got Keith Hernandez's phone number. And Mark and Keith had a lot of stories and a lot of time together. And during the 40-year celebration of the 82 Cardinals world champs, Keith and Mark spent a lot of time together. There's some really good pictures of the two together. But for whatever reason, Keith's schedule, I'm sure with his broadcasting, kind of limited his scope. But he didn't. I don't think Heather's not very happy that she didn't get to talk to Keith.
Oh, that's too bad.
That's too bad.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
I would be interested to know, Ethan, if Mark told you yourself any of his favorite stories from his days between the lines.
I think Mark had a lot of close relationships with his players. I think that what I would always hear from Mark is that they were all very serious ball players. He would say we were a bunch of killers. We would do anything to win a baseball game. Steve Braun is probably one of his favorite guys back in the day playing. And I think that Mark, he liked being in the middle of the mix and being on the mound and having his back against the wall. If you look at his stats, he did very well against the Hall of Famers that he faced. And sometimes there'd be, like a kind of a punch and Judy hitter that would hit 500 against him. But it's really interesting going back and looking at those stats. I think that Mark was, he was a big Thurman Munson fan. He was a big fan of Whitey Herzog, and I think that they spent a lot of time off the field together also. Daryl Porter was another one of Mark's favorites. They did a lot of adventures going fishing. out to over the countryside here in the St. Louis area and Kansas City. But I think that Mark had a lot of good relationships with some players after the game that he probably didn't have. I know that Mark was a big Ferguson Jenkins fan. They would get together every once in a while. There's some nice pictures in Mark's office of him and Ferguson together. But I think Mark was pretty private about his time. He was George Brett's best man at his first wedding, and vice versa. They were roommates together at Omaha, and George Brett's another one that didn't circle back with Heather. That I think Heather was disappointed that Brett didn't come back and contribute to the book.
That's that. It's interesting to see. So Littell was Brett's best man. Littell had a good relationship with Hernandez, but nobody circles back to talk about the old days.
Well, I think, yeah, like I said, I think a lot of it maybe is they think that it was private as far as the life in the clubhouse, and not everything was rated PG-13 as far as what happened. So I think that maybe that's part of it too, is that kind of let the legend tell the story and not get in the way of it. So the time that they had together was short. It's been a long time ago, but they were important years for all those guys.
Heather mentioned Thomas Van Heining, who is on the call this evening here tonight. Thomas, could I have you on mute for a second? I was wondering if you had any comments or stories about Littell from the years ago.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, so I grew up in Puerto Rico, and in 73, 74, it was very interesting because some of your best prospects went to Puerto Rico, like Mike Schmidt played for Cagua. So Mark pitched against Mike Schmidt and Gary Carter. And that Caguas team with those guys that I mentioned won the Caribbean World Series in Mexico that year. For example, Mickey Rivers, who played against Mark, I think in the 1976 play ALCS, Mickey Rivers played for the Santurce team that finished fifth to Mark's fourth. So I think Mark, I think, shared accommodations with maybe two or three other guys. Dennis Leonard, who I interviewed, Dennis Leonard was a character from Brooklyn, New York, and he got along real well with Mark. And Lynn McLaughlin was a prospect pitcher with the St. Louis Cardinals. Ken Wright from Pensacola, Florida, was one of the strikeout leaders in that league. At that time, Puerto Rico's like the interstates and the states are pretty modern and nice, but Puerto Rico still had these old rural highways by then, and they were just getting ready to build like a highway that would make the road trips quicker. So when Mark pitched for the Arecibo Wolves, which is about a little over an hour from San Juan, most of the Arecibo imports under Steve Burrows and Jack McKeon actually lived in Arecibo near the ocean in fairly primitive accommodations. Now, Mike Schmidt and some of your other American players like Chambliss lived in condos, in the San Juan area. So you had a mixed bag there, but it was a very interesting league, and it really was not a development league. That league was designed to win. If you were an American player who went down to Puerto Rico and did not produce in 2 or 3 weeks, they sent you back to the States with a one-way ticket. And Carlos Pieve was the Arecibo general manager who spoke very good English. And apparently the Arecibo team that I mentioned had a good working relationship with the Royals. Like Tom Poquette played for Arecibo, and so did a pitcher named Gary Lance, who I think only pitched maybe a couple of major league games with the Royals in 77. But there was a certain camaraderie between the Kansas City Royals imports, the young players, and they got along pretty well with the native players. So from what I understand, it was a very pleasant situation overall.
Yeah, Heather has a really interesting picture of that team that Mark was on in the Puerto Rican League. I'm sure it's going to be in the book that she was able to track down. But they look like a bunch of, I wouldn't want to play against them. They look like a pretty tough crowd.
Yeah. So Rich Coggins, who was a Baltimore, Rich Coggins was one of the good outfielders and so was Jose Pepe Mangual, who played with the Expos. So basically, you're talking about a league that was better than AAA and maybe a shade or two below the big leagues. It was a very important league. Now, of course, with the humongous salaries and protecting some of these crybabies, they don't send them to the winter leagues like
Oh
they used
no, yeah, that was just think about all those innings that these guys pitched outside of the window of time they were in the majors. You look at their minor league and their, baseball reference innings pitched. A lot of times they pitched more outside of the major leagues in professional ball than they did in the big leagues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And by the way, Frank Robinson, some of the managers that managed against Mark in Puerto Rico, you had Jim Gilliam, who passed away, I think, in the late 70s. But Gilliam managed the San Juan team that had Chris Chambliss at first base. Frank Robinson, who was a year or two away from being the Cleveland Indians manager, Frank managed Santurce, and a guy named Bobby Wine managed Caguas. Pat Corrales was the player manager for the Ponce Lions. So you had some characters, and also the American League umpire group had a working agreement. So some of your best umpires, like Durwood Merrill, who was a colorful Texan, some of those umpires, Steve Palermo, those guys went to Puerto Rico to get extra umpiring experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting.
And we had a mention of Red Sox legend Tom Paquette there. That was kind of cool. Does anybody have anything else for Ethan tonight? I know Heather's been trying to get back in. She had a Wi-Fi problem. That's kind of lousy. I'm trying to get her back in, but doesn't look like it's going to happen. So this has been a pretty cool presentation. I want to thank Ethan for being here this evening. I want to thank Heather, wherever you are, my friend, for doing this, because, oh no, these things happen. Wow. Anyway, next Monday night, September 16th, we have a pinch hitter scheduled for you. Now, our original presenter, Frank Hart, is unable to make it, but I'm happy to tell you that Aaron Fishman, who is a great author, will be joining us to discuss his new book, A Baseball Gaijin, Chasing a Dream to Japan and Back. You're not going to want to miss his talk. It's a lot of fun. It'll be 7 p.m. Eastern this Monday, September 16th. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching this, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to sabr.org/join today. For H.R. Ryan and Ethan Sargent, I'm Bruce McClure. Have a good night, everybody.